At the Austin Convention Center in the spring of 1981, 2,400 seats were filled to the back wall. The event was the North American Karate Federation's national championships, and the day had turned humid inside the halls. The kind of thickness that settles on skin when too many people breathe in one room for 6 hours. It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The sun had moved across the glass panels above the arena floor and cast everything in a flat, tired light. The challenger's name was Marcus Keller. He was 23 years old, 6 feet 2 inches tall, 198 pounds, solid through the shoulders and forearms. He had won the Pacific Coast Championship 2 years running. He held the fastest recorded kick speed in the regional federation at that time, a spinning heel delivery clocked at 54 miles per hour, measured twice, independently verified. He had compiled an undefeated record across 15 consecutive tournaments, and he had never been taken to the ground. He had never had a technique seriously countered. He had never been made to look uncertain. He arrived at the Austin event as the presumptive heir to the championship, and everyone backstage had said so. In the next 43 seconds, with 4 distinct movements, a statement would be made and a name would move through the martial arts world for 45 years. Nobody in that arena knew it was coming. The spectators in the stands had no foreknowledge. They had come to watch points accumulate on a scoreboard. They had no way of knowing that they were about to witness something that would be told in whispers in dojos from Los Angeles to New York. Something that would be written into a magazine article 5 years later. Something that would exist in the memory of every person who was sitting in those seats. It is necessary to tell you who was there before you understand what happened. The world Chuck Norris inhabited in 1981 was not the world he had inhabited 10 years before. He had been a championship competitor in the late 1960s and through the early 1970s, but his face had entered television and film in a way that shifted him into a different tier of visibility. He had appeared in small roles. He had been asked to choreograph fight sequences. He had opened a chain of karate studios across Texas that bore his name. He was no longer anonymous. He was no longer just a fighter moving through the tournament circuit with the ordinary ambitions of an athlete. He was famous. This bothered a certain kind of person. The martial arts world has always contained people who believed that the pure practice of the art could be corrupted by commercialism. This was the substance of the underground resentment toward Chuck Norris, not that he was not skilled, but that his skill had been monetized in a way that seemed to trivialize it. The studios bore his name, the television appearances bore his face. The movies were distributed nationally. To a young man like Marcus Keller, who had trained in a small dojo outside Portland and had dedicated every waking hour to the progression of technique, Chuck Norris represented something that felt like betrayal. It represented the idea that you could leave the dojo and still call yourself a martial artist. The championships proceeded through the afternoon. Preliminary rounds, eliminations, the predictable progressions. And then, sometime around 4 o'clock during a break between matches, Marcus Keller approached the microphone on the arena floor. He was not asked to do this. The tournament director did not call him forward. He simply walked down the steps from the stands, passed through the crowd at the guardrail, and claimed the space where champions were announced. He raised the microphone. He held it with the kind of certainty that comes from knowing you have not yet been stopped. And he spoke directly, his voice traveling through the arena's speakers into every corner. "I want Chuck Norris to know that I'm here," he said. The crowd quieted. The tournament director turned in his seat. "If he's got the courage to step on this mat, I'll beat him in 1 round. 1 round, that's all I need, the television star and the real fighter. Let's see what he's really got." He lowered the microphone, he turned and walked back up into the stands. He did not shout, he did not point, he did not make demands, he simply said it as though it was a fact he had verified in advance. The way you might announce that the sun would set at a particular time. The announcement moved through the stands in waves. People turned to each other, some laughed, some did not. By the time it had traveled 20 rows back, it had been heard by everyone who was close enough to Chuck's seat to matter. Chuck was sitting in the 3rd row. He was wearing a white t-shirt, ordinary, unstudied, and a denim jacket despite the heat. He was wearing street shoes. He had been watching the matches with the kind of attention that suggested he was reading them, studying the patterns, the habits, the small failures in technique that each competitor exhibited. He had a cap on his head, pulled low. He was 60 years old. He looked tired. When the announcement came, he heard it. He did not look up immediately. He continued watching the mat. He allowed perhaps 30 seconds to pass. Then he folded the cap once. He folded it again. He sat it on the seat beside him, with the care someone might use to set down a bird that was sleeping. Then he stood. The recognition moved across the arena with the kind of speed that a current moves across water. It began in the rows immediately around him. Someone pointed, someone else turned, someone else nodded, and it spread backward row by row. By the time he had taken 3 steps toward the aisle, every person in the arena who knew what Chuck Norris looked like had understood. By the time he was at the guardrail, the volume had risen. By the time he was descending the steps to the mat, people were on their feet. He did not acknowledge them. He did not wave. He did not smile at anyone. The tournament director was standing now. The judges were standing. Marcus Keller was still in his seat in the stands, watching, waiting to see if the invitation would be accepted. And Chuck Norris was walking across the mat toward the center. He had already lost. He just did not know it yet. And this is the thing about distance. This is the thing about what a fight actually is. A fight is not 2 men hitting each other. A fight is a negotiation about distance. It is about who controls the space between bodies. It is about the person who understands that striking is only possible at a precise measurement from an opponent. Too close and you have no leverage. Too far and you have no effect. The person who controls that distance controls the fight. The person who cannot read that distance will try to strike from positions where striking is impossible, and his techniques will find air. He will overcommit. He will create openings. He will exhaust himself. Marcus Keller did not understand this yet. He had been taught technique. He had practiced combinations. He had drilled his kicks until they were fast and his hands until they were sharp. But he had never been taught to read distance the way distance is read by a person who has fought in 67 championship bouts across 15 years. He had never stood opposite someone who could feel the geometry of a strike before it began. He had no practice in that. The match was called to begin. The official raised his hand. He looked at both men. He lowered his hand and spoke the word that meant go. Marcus Keller advanced. He was moving with the kind of confidence that comes from never being stopped. His first technique was a front kick delivered from a distance that seemed correct. His foot would have struck Chuck's chest if Chuck Norris had been standing in the place where Marcus believed him to be. But Chuck was not there. He had read the angle of Marcus's shoulders before the kick began. He had felt the distribution of weight that would precede the technique. He had moved 6 inches to his left. The kick traveled past him. The air moved. The kick found nothing. The crowd made a sound, not loud, a kind of intake. Marcus withdrew his leg. He reset his stance. There was no change in his expression. His second technique was a spinning heel kick, the technique that had been clocked at 54 miles per hour, the technique that had never been defended against in any match. He turned his back to Chuck. He rotated. He brought his heel around in the precise arc that weeks of practice had hardened into muscle memory. It was the right technique. It was perfectly executed. It landed 2 inches from Chuck's face, close enough that Chuck's hair moved from the impact of air. The crowd was louder now. People were leaning forward. Marcus did not commit the error of overreacting. He did not show frustration. He simply reset. He was breathing harder now. You could see it in his shoulders. His third technique was an uppercut delivered from very close distance, his fist traveling upward with the kind of velocity that should have connected with Chuck's jaw. But Chuck had stepped back and to his right a moment before Marcus's foot had begun to move from the floor. The space had opened. The punch was thrown into space that had been occupied and then was not. And as Marcus came forward through that space, reaching for a target that was no longer there, Chuck Norris moved in the particular way that distance allows when you have understood it. Second one. He delivered a straight right hand strike to the center of Marcus Keller's chest. He pulled it 1 inch short. He could have struck him. He did not. Marcus staggered backward. He was not hit, not truly, but he was displaced. The wind of the strike had moved him. He lost his footing. He caught himself. The arena was absolutely silent now. The kind of silence that descends when people understand they are witnessing something that contradicts what they believe to be true. The official called the match. It had lasted 43 seconds. There were no points. There was no score that would make sense to the judges. What had happened was simpler than that. What had happened was that a younger man had attempted to strike an older man repeatedly and had failed. And the older man had demonstrated, in a single-held strike, that he could have struck back at any moment and had chosen not to. Chuck Norris lowered his hand. He looked at Marcus Keller. And then he spoke. The words were quiet. Nobody in the stands heard them. Only Marcus heard them. Only he would know what was said. What happened in that moment was a choice. Marcus Keller stood in a particular place between what he had believed and what was true. He could pretend it had been luck. He could say that Chuck had simply moved at the right instant. He could construct an explanation that preserved the integrity of his own certainty. Or he could do something else. He did something else. He nodded. He walked to the center of the mat. He bowed to Chuck Norris, a gesture that was not required by any rules of competition, a gesture that was entirely voluntary. It was an apology. It was also a kind of grace. It was the public acknowledgement that he had been read, and that the reading was correct. Then he turned and walked off the mat. The crowd had not moved. They were still processing what they had seen. It took perhaps 5 seconds before someone stood. Then another person. Then the rows behind them. Within 10 seconds, the entire arena was standing. The volume rose. It was not the sound of celebration. It was something different. It was the sound of people who had watched something stop them from understanding the world the way they had understood it before. As Chuck Norris walked toward the aisle to leave the mat, a tournament referee who had been judging matches for 17 years reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. It was the kind of touch that confirmed something. It was a gesture that said, "Yes, I saw this. This was real. You were not an illusion." The story moved through the martial arts world after that. It traveled through dojos. It was told by instructors to students. It was mentioned in phone calls and in letters. And as it traveled, it changed. In some versions, Marcus Keller had been knocked unconscious. In some versions, Chuck Norris had struck him full power and he had absorbed it. In other versions, there had been a moment of telepathic understanding, where Marcus had simply known he would lose and surrendered the match mentally. The story grew. The story shrank. The story gathered false details and shed true ones. What remained constant was the essential fact: a young champion had challenged an older man and had been dismantled through technique and distance and patience. Not through strength, not through speed, but through understanding. 5 years later, a writer from a martial arts magazine would seek out Marcus Keller and would ask him about the match. Marcus Keller was still fighting then, though he had never quite regained the certainty he'd had before. He was asked directly, "What did Chuck Norris say to you when everyone else had left the mat?" Marcus Keller looked at the writer for a long moment. And then he said, "He told me that being young and being good are not the same thing. He told me that the kind of fighter I was going to become would only happen if I stopped believing I already was that fighter. He told me I had a choice. I could spend the rest of my life explaining why I lost, or I could learn something from it." 45 years later, Marcus Keller would still be teaching karate. He would train under a different name, his own studio, his own philosophy. He would never defeat Chuck Norris in any circumstance, but that was never what mattered. What mattered was that he had received a lesson in a single moment and that he had chosen to receive it, rather than to refuse it. The thing that must be understood about confrontation is that it is almost never about the confrontation itself. It is about whether a person has the capacity to be changed by evidence. It is about whether you can stand in a place where your certainty is removed from you and still choose to move forward. This is what humility is. It is not weakness. It is not the absence of confidence. It is the specific capacity to revise what you believe about yourself in the presence of truth. Chuck Norris did not go on to many more public tournament appearances after this. He was moving toward film work exclusively. He was moving away from the circuit. But the match at Austin was never forgotten, because it was not really about Chuck Norris at all. And it was not really about Marcus Keller. It was about something that each person in that arena carried home with them that day. The idea that mastery is something that time teaches, that the person who is still certain is still learning, and that the real victory is the one that takes place in another person's mind. If you want to find out what happened when Chuck Norris was challenged by someone else entirely, someone who had heard the Austin story and believed it didn't apply to him, make sure you are subscribed and comment below where you are watching from. Next week we will tell you about the time a former Navy SEAL officer questioned Chuck Norris's age as a disqualification for fighting, and what happened when they stepped into a ring together. The story is one that has never been verified by anyone who was there, because the people who were there never wanted to speak about it again. Subscribe now.